Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. I continue my series on French pistols. We left off last with the Ruby pistol, and as I said in that video, many of those made it into stores and found their way into future conflicts over the next half-century. Even though much of their arsenal was obsolete, France wasn't in much position after the war to massively rearm, as they were exhausted, deep in debt, and needed to concentrate on repairing war damage. Major war also seemed to be a small concern at the time. The Great Depression and government instability would exacerbate these problems. Still, the General Staff managed to have a decree issued in 1922 for research and development into more modern weapons. Their order of priority was 1. A replacement for the show shot, 2. A bolt-action rifle, 3. A semi-auto rifle, 4. A submachine gun, 5. A grenade launcher, 6. A mortar, and finally, a semi-auto pistol. I've covered the bolt-action and semi-auto rifles in my French rifle series, so please go check that out. And besides the pistol, which I will cover today, the rest of the small arms are currently beyond the scope of my channel. As I indicated, the state of affairs in France made for slow progress on many of these weapons. Still, the possibility of the French looking for a new sidearm was the stimulus for FN to have John Moses Browning work on a new pistol design. I go over the development of the high-powered in my 4/20/2019 video, so I won't dive too deep into it here. At first, the French wanted their new pistol to fire the 9mm Parabellum cartridge, but this desire changed around 1927, when the 7.65 by 20mm or 7.65 long cartridge, which was developed from the 30 caliber pistol cartridge that was developed in the United States for use in the never-used Pedersen device, took precedence over the 9mm. While pistols of various calibers were tested in the 1930 trials, 7.65 long was France's favorite, as the pistol that eventually won, and later supplement, were designed to fire this round like the 1911 was designed specifically for the 45 ACP. In 1930, the French Ministry of War announced competitive trials to be completed by 1933. While there were 22 total pistols entered in various calibers, no pistols were recommended for adoption, even though the 5 best pistols were chosen: 2 Moss pistols, a Bayard, a Sestris, and the Brown Dieudonné Save designed by FN, all in 7.65 long. The Commission kind of learned what it wanted through the next round of tests, which a pistol based off the 1911 with some changes, including being able to use the 7.65 long caliber. They wanted the lockwork to be removable as a single assembly, have a magazine safety that disconnected the hammer bar from sear, a manual safety mounted on the side to block the firing pin from the hammer, and field stripping was to be accomplished by removing the slide stop. A new set of trials were ordered in 1935, and there were 4 entrants, all in 7.65mm long. They were a Moss entry, what became the FN High Power, a Bonifacio Echerichia with a 1911 clone, and a Société Alsacienne de Construction Mécanique, called SACM from here on out, entered a design by Charles Petter. The examples were measured for velocity and accuracy, with a 950 round without cleaning or stripping test to follow, as well as more testing with as many as 4,000 rounds fired through the pistols. The Spanish 1911 was judged to be inferior to the other 3 pistols. The FN performed well, but the French seemed dead set on adopting a French-made pistol. The Commission recommended the Petter pistol, and it would be adopted as the Pistolet Automatic 1935A, A standing for the Alsacienne in SACM's name. The Moss pistol later became the 1935S. As I kind of put the cart in front of the horse with this video, let's dive deeper into each of these 2 pistols. 1935A. SACM had existed since before the Franco-Prussian War that produced mainly machinery and locomotives. After the Germans annexed the Alsace area, they would merge with the German company. The company would continue to expand after the First World War and the return of Alsace to France. They had built a factory in Cholet in 1936 and make rifle and machine gun barrels, and this is where the 1935A would be made. Backing up just a bit, this is where a gentleman by the name of Charles Gabriel Petter consulted. Petter was a Swiss man by birth, but joined and became a highly decorated member of the French Foreign Legion in World War I. He was made a French citizen by presidential decree. He'd be the director of a French branch of a Belgian arms company and later consult for SACM. Petter would go on to design what would become the 1935A, which is a modification of the base Colt 1911. The swinging barrel length became 2 lengths, a loaded chamber indicator was added near the ejection port, the manual safety turns the cylinder between the chamber and firing pin so the hammer cannot strike the firing pin when engaged, a magazine safety replaced the grip safety, the recoil spring was made captive, there's no bushing, and last but not least, the very likely inspired by the Tokarev packaged firing system. Sig would later purchase a license to produce guns under the Petter patent. Remember, he was born a Swissman, and they would base the Sig P210 very heavily off this design. SACM would start producing the 1935A pistols in 1937, and after working through initial defects, they would find their way into issuance from the Cholet factory. There were somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000, somewhere in the B block, produced before the Germans reached Cholet. Some pistols would make it to Toula to arm Vichy French forces. The Germans would waste no time in producing 1935A pistols, giving it the ordnance designation 635F. My source material strongly suggests that these were used only to arm troops in France due to the oddball caliber. The Germans would keep the same quality control, standard of manufacture, and finish as the pre-war models. These pistols will of course have Waffen-Amps, either Eagle 655 or WAA 251. Nearly 24,000 1935A pistols would be produced under German occupation. After liberation, the French would continue to produce the 1935A, starting with serial number D4551. They would continue to produce these pistols until February 1950, with I-4590 being the last pistol produced. In all, there were 10,700 pre-war pistols, 23,850 German occupation pistols, and 50,400 post-liberation pistols to give the overall number of 84,950 produced. If this sounds woefully small for a time period that went through a war, keep in mind the second-place pistol in the trials would also be adopted as the 1935S. The 1935S. As stated earlier, Moss entered 2 pistols for the trials in 1933. No pistol was selected, but the Ministry of War directed Moss to develop another arm to meet the specifications of the Committee of Versailles using this experience. The new pistol would go on to be passed up as a regulation pistol by what would become the 1935A, but would still gain adoption on December 29, 1937, as the pistolet automatic model 1935S, as the limitations of number of pistols produced by the SACM factory became apparent. As with the 1935A, this was based off the basic Colt design with a few differences. The 1935S would also get a captive recoil spring and an in-block firing mechanism. The 1935S would replace the locking rings on top of the barrel. A sharp cut would be milled out in front of the chamber that mates with a recess milled into the slide in front of the ejection port. This would later show up in Glock pistols. While Moss was given an initial contract for 10,000 pistols, only 1,404 were made by June 1940, as they were concentrating more on rifles. Production stopped after the Germans reached Saint-Étienne, and the 1935S would not see production until liberation in 1944. Keep this in mind if you see a 1935S pistol with Waffen-Amps on it, since none were made under German supervision, and none would be issued to German troops. This makes it almost 100% likely that any Waffen-Amps you see are faked. Moss would only make a total of 6,626 pistols, including their pre-war numbers, as their focus was needed to produce weapons for Indochina. First, they would subcontract pistols to Manufrance, or MF, short for what you see across the screen, who would make 10,000 pistols. Then Chateaureau, or Mac would revise the safety to correspond to the positions on the 1935A. The pistols with the revised safety from here on out would be stamped M1. Mac would produce 56,087 pistols from 1946 to 1956. The final contract would go to SAGEM, short for what you see across the screen, who would go on to produce 10,000 pistols from 1946 to 1953. This made for a total of 82,773 1935S pistols produced. The 1935A and 1935S pistols would see service in Algeria and French Indochina, along with various other pistols made by French civilian makers, made under French occupation, probably the subject of my next firearms video, and aid from the U.S. The 1935 pistols would be replaced by the model 1950 pistol, something I don't currently have in my collection. Alright, let's talk a little bit about my pistols. I have the 1935A right here and the 1935S. Then I have a field stripped 1911 up there, since these are loosely based off the 1911. And in case I need to make some comparison and contrast, I have the field strip 1911 up there. So my 1935A is an E-block pistol. When SACM was liberated from the Germans, the last German occupation pistol would be D4551, and they're made in 10,000 unit blocks. So this is probably made in 1944, 1945, since this is a early E-block pistol. And this is an SAGEM. Now, in the history portion, I talked about how Moss actually made the fewest numbers of 1935 pistols, even though they were the company that designed it. Most 1935S pistols were subcontracted out. Mine is an SAGEM. They made 10,000 between 1946 and 1953. This is serial number 76 something, so it is toward the last quarter of a made. Now, before I take these apart to show the similarities and differences, let's take a look at them from the outside. The slide is definitely longer on the 1935A, but I believe the barrel on both pistols are the same length. We'll look at that when we take them apart. Also, one other thing I want to show before we take them apart is I want to show the safety. Now I'm gonna let's show that we are empty right there. All right, so the safety being off, you can see that as soon as the hammer will strike that, and of course I'll strike the firing pin. The safety is just a rotating barrel, and you can if you accidentally hit your trigger while that's open, that will prevent you from firing the gun. So you could actually, now I wouldn't run this without the safety on like this, because you take the safety off and you hit that hammers still could possibly make you fire. And on the 35S, now you notice mine actually has an M1 after that. Prior to the M1 update, the movement of the safety was the opposite of the 1935A. So they wanted to make it so pulling it the same direction was safe and fire. So any pistol that was after this update got the M1 designation. And from somebody I trust on French firearms, this guy's helped out Ian McCollum on his book a lot. I threw the question out there, what was French doctrine when they carried? And they still carried with an empty chamber. They didn't carry cocked and locked or anything like that. So they still carried the pistol with an empty chamber. So anyway, let's take these apart. The 35A is just a tad different than usual Browning pistols, whereas you don't take it back to stop. You just kind of feel it. I believe it says 5 millimeters, but you just kind of feel it. Pull that out, and now let's get this out of the way. On the 1935A, you can see that there is a little outline right there. You can actually push the fire control packet out, and I talked about that earlier. And SIG would later take this and run with it, because the SIG P210 is based off the 1935A. 1935S, it's a little, let's pull the magazine out of that. I don't believe I pulled the magazine out of the 35A, which I should have. But let's do that right now. 1935S is a little more common. You bring it back to the stop, pull it out. So, and now in the field stripping instructions on the two pistols in the same source, They talked about the packet on the 1935A. They didn't talk about it in the 1935S, but you can still see that there's a, you can see the outline there. So you should still be able to push that out and pull that out if you want to. So we are stripped down, and we are going to, let's make a few comparisons. Now, I wondered earlier if the barrels were the same size, and it looks like the 35A is actually, the chamber and barrel are actually a little bit longer on the 35A. So appearances aren't deceiving there. Now, one big difference on the 35A is these loops here. Like on the 1911, you got one. They designed it so you had two, which is really cool because your captive springs guide rod has a loop there, and that makes it real easy when you put everything back together. The 1935A, big difference between it and the S is, you have your two grooves in the slide there, matching up with those. On the 1935S, you have just a shoulder right there, and it just matches up with a groove that's milled in there. And you'll see this like later on in the Glocks in the 1980s. And also, you only have the one loop, kind of like on the 1911. To me, one thing I do like is you don't have to worry about the bushing. The captive guide rod means you don't have to worry about the bushing and all this crap, so it does make it a lot easier for taking it apart and putting together. So let's get back to the history portion, and I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts on shooting it. When I did my high power videos, the French contest being a big stimulus for FN to originally ask Browning to start designing, and having Dieudonné say finish that particular pistol was a big part of that story. I only owned the 1935S and had yet to shoot it thanks to general lack of ammo. I kind of crapped on the 1935 pistols, wondering why France would choose them over the high power. After handling and shooting the 1935 pistols, I still believe the high power was the best of these pistols, but I can say the 1935s are not bad pistols, and build quality-wise are equal to that of the high power. I guess where I fault the French is repeating the mistake of the Model 1892 revolver and pairing their new pistol with an underwhelming cartridge. Even if they wanted to eschew the high power's double-stack magazine, 9mm would have been a superior choice to what basically has the same power as a .380. Thanks to Steinel Ammunition producing a run of 7.65 French long, I was able to shoot my 1935A and 1935S pistols. These aren't bad pistols to shoot, and I did like the 1935A over the 1935S by just a sliver. Although if you made me guess which one was in the holster by drawing it and firing, I doubt I could guess correctly. The 1935A does fit the hand a little better than the blockier 1935S, but again, the difference is minuscule. While I showed the differences in the tabletop, the manual of arms is similar enough as to not warrant confusion between the two. In doing the ripoff of C&A Arsenal, would I take it to war versus its contemporaries? That is a hard answer. It is a good pistol, but not a good round. If it shot 9mm, it would easily be included in my top 5 list, likely number 3 behind the high power and P38. Both 1935 pistols, especially the 35A, are easy to strip and reassemble under pressure. They are damn well built. I'd put the build quality up there with the high power. While I'm tempted to give it a soft yes, I think I have to go with my it has to have the power of a 9x19 rule, so for World War II, I give it a soft no. Please be aware of where your elected officials and the groups that claim to represent you stand on the Constitution. Please join the GOA, the biggest and best no-compromise 2A organization out there, and get $5 off your membership with the link in my description. If you like my content, please check out my other videos, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Engagement really helps with the algorithm. Also, please check out my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, and who I support on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.